Welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. In our last lecture on metaphilosophy, we introduced three lenses through which philosophy might be understood: the conceptual, the axiological, and the existential. In this lecture, we'll examine philosophy through the lens of conceptual analysis that is provided by Elizabeth and Monroe Beardsley in their article, What is Philosophy? I have a 6-year-old at home, and it was clear from the moment he learned to talk that he was a philosopher. All children are philosophers. They approach the world that we take for granted with an endless sense of wonder and curiosity. It actually takes considerable effort and institutional conditioning to stop children from approaching everything with wonder and curiosity. Philosophy begins with that early spark that burns in the eternal question, why? Can I have the new Sonic the Hedgehog game? No. Why? Because it costs money. Why? Because the people who made it need money. Why? To buy things like food and clothes. Why? Because food and clothes also cost money. Why? Because it takes work to make food and clothes, and no one would do any work if they weren't making any money. Why? And here it starts to get a bit tricky. Because people are basically selfish? That doesn't seem right. Because work is awful and no one would do it unless they were threatened with not having food or clothes? That's even worse. At this point, parents usually default to something like, because that's just the way things are. Philosophers are the people who never stopped asking why, and who never accepted that's just the way things are as a good enough answer. Meet the Beardsleys. Elizabeth Lane Beardsley and Monroe C. Beardsley were partners in both marriage and in philosophy. Elizabeth was one of the earliest prominent women in American academic philosophy, contributing groundbreaking work in feminist philosophy and the philosophy of language. Monroe became a leading figure in aesthetics and the philosophy of art. Their collaboration on What is Philosophy in the 1960s articulates their conviction that philosophy isn't some weird academic pastime that only stodgy professors in Ivy League universities understand. Philosophy is just what everyone does naturally. Philosophy is asking for reasons. The question isn't whether or not you should do philosophy. You're already doing it all the time. The question is whether or not you're doing it well. The Beardsleys trace philosophy's origins to a universal human activity, the demand for justification. When we are persistent in our pursuit of good reasons for our beliefs, we inevitably arrive at questions that no other discipline addresses. As the Beardsleys put it, the philosopher works under a sign that says, "The buck stops here." Philosophy is where the chain of justification ends. We spend most of our lives sleepwalking through someone else's dream. We unquestioningly accept the worldview that is handed to us as children and repeated endlessly by our parents, our teachers, television, social media, and Nike commercials. This worldview is constituted out of perfectly ordinary everyday beliefs that don't even show up as beliefs at all. And if we begin to examine the foundation of these ordinary beliefs, to look critically at the philosophical beliefs that stand underneath our ordinary beliefs, we might begin to discover cracks in the reasoning of common sense views about the way things are. As adults, we typically inhabit a world that comes with a list of beliefs that seem to be already established. Consider our beliefs about crime and punishment. Perhaps a headline pops up on our social media feed about some criminal receiving a prison sentence for some petty crime. Good, we think. They broke the law, they should go to jail. We generally take it for granted that criminals should be held responsible for their actions. This is what the Beardsleys call an ordinary belief. It represents part of a network of commonplace assumptions that shape our actions and judgments in countless invisible ways. They're just the way things are. Except that they aren't, because beneath the surface of every ordinary belief lies a vast, interconnected web of deeper, more general, and more fundamental beliefs. Should a person who violates a law be locked in a cage by state authorities? Is political force a tool that we are justified in using to retaliate against lawbreakers? Was the law itself a significant, meaningful, or even a moral law? What is it that makes a law moral or immoral in the first place? We start out with an ordinary, everyday belief about a specific case, the imprisonment of a single individual. Then we start picking away at the foundations of that belief. And when we do, we find that every ordinary belief rests on other beliefs that are a bit deeper, a bit more general, and a bit more fundamental. Soon, we're no longer talking about one specific criminal and one specific case of punishment. Soon, we're questioning the nature of justice itself, the basis of moral responsibility, and the foundations of legal authority. We're no longer questioning ordinary beliefs. We've now shifted to questioning what the Beardsleys call philosophical beliefs. According to the Beardsleys, there are two key factors that make a belief philosophical. First, a philosophical belief is highly general. It applies to broad categories of things rather than to specific cases. The question, did the defendant freely choose to break the law, is a narrow and specific question, but it rests on a more general assumption that humans have the ability to make free choices, that we all possess free will. Asking whether it is true that all human beings possess genuine free will is a philosophical question. Second, a philosophical belief is highly fundamental. It deals with the basic assumptions that support our entire network of ordinary beliefs. A fundamental belief is a belief that, if it were to be changed or revised, would send shockwaves throughout our entire belief system. Philosophical beliefs, in the Beardsley sense, constitute a sort of conceptual framework that gives structure and form to the architecture of our ordinary, everyday worldviews. These beliefs are often invisible, operating beneath the surface level of conscious awareness, working behind the scenes to shape the ways that we understand and interpret the world. As a result, they are almost never challenged or examined. They are simply accepted as the way things are. If philosophy is about examining the foundations of our belief systems, then we need some way to evaluate whether or not we're doing it well. So what does a good philosophical argument look like? The Beardsleys identify three criteria. The first criteria is clarity. We must define the terms in our arguments with precision and express them with great care and attention to detail. In this way, we reduce ambiguity, eliminate vagueness, and ward off potential misunderstandings about our reasoning. The second criteria is reasonableness. It isn't enough to simply state what we believe. We should also be able to make a rational case for why we believe what we believe. A good argument sets out strong reasons for accepting the truth of its conclusions, reasons that should be able to withstand equally strong objections. The test of reasonableness is whether you can convince the most critical skeptic that your belief is justified. The final criteria is consistency. Our beliefs should hold together. They should support one another like strong threads within an interconnected web. If our beliefs clash against, contradict, or cancel one another out, then the structural integrity of our entire conceptual framework is put at risk. Take free will as an example. We typically want to state both that human choices are freely chosen and that the universe is governed by predictable laws that guarantee that all events are determined by prior causes. As we will see in Module 5, these two beliefs are potentially inconsistent. There are good reasons to suspect that both beliefs cannot at the same time be true. These three criteria, clarity, reasonableness, and consistency, provide our implicit standards for assessing any philosophical position. Are the concepts clear? Are the arguments justified? Does the belief support or contradict our other beliefs? The Beardsleys give us a naturalized entry point into philosophical inquiry. Philosophy isn't a mysterious activity accessible only to specialists. It's what happens when ordinary curiosity is sustained long enough to reach fundamental questions. It's what a child does naturally when they won't stop asking why, and what most of us have unfortunately been trained to stop doing. As we excavate, one by one, the layers of underlying assumptions that ground, support, and shape our everyday beliefs, we eventually move from the specific to the general, from the surface to the foundation, and eventually strike the bedrock of philosophical belief. This picture suggests a kind of architectural structure to knowledge. Philosophical beliefs form a solid foundation upon which we can build and rebuild our network of surface beliefs. This is similar to the image proposed by the influential philosopher W.V.O. Cahn in his famous essay, Two Dogmas of Empiricism, but with a crucial difference. Instead of foundations supporting a building, Cahn suggests that we imagine our beliefs as forming an interconnected web of belief. Some beliefs, like the belief that there is milk in the refrigerator, sit at the surface of the web. These beliefs are available for immediate testing through our normal sensory experience of the world. Other beliefs, like our belief in the laws of logic and mathematics, occupy the core of the web, where they are more insulated from challenges from experience. The crucial difference from the Beardsleys' account is this. For Cahn, no belief is absolutely immune to revision. Altering a core belief is more difficult and would demand a radical reorganization of our entire belief system, but the fact that a belief supports many other beliefs does not mean that that belief is necessarily true. When our experience of the world conflicts with what we would expect from our beliefs, this indicates that there is a problem with some belief, but this doesn't tell us whether the problem is with a surface belief or with a core belief. If Quine is right, then there is no absolute bedrock, no bottom layer to philosophical inquiry, no final question waiting to be resolved. The work of science is limited, at least in theory, by what it is possible to test in a laboratory. But the work of philosophy might be limitless. Every layer revealing deeper, more general, and more fundamental questions beneath, pushing ever onward into new domains, generating new questions, and widening our conception of ourselves and our world without limit and without end. I suspect that Quine might be right here. Humanity is a young species, and the universe is incomprehensibly ancient and vast. It would be naive to think that some final math equation, some ultimate answer to the last philosophical riddle, awaits just around the corner. Likely, it's riddles all the way down. And that's a good thing. An existence of endless discovery, a universe of endless learning and endless becoming. And philosophy stands ready to face that challenge, as no other field of study can. We can still accept that our ordinary beliefs rest on deeper, more general, and more fundamental assumptions, without assuming that there is a final end to all questions. We can still demand that our reasons for holding our beliefs embody the principles of clarity, reasonableness, and consistency. What our lens of conceptual analysis reveals here is that the Beardsley system, like any good philosophical framework, opens new questions, raises new possibilities, and expands the horizons of our conceptual universe. In our next lecture, we'll trade this conceptual lens for the axiological lens used by Bertrand Russell to reveal the value of philosophical inquiry. And I'll see you there.